It all begins with a group of explorers stumbling upon an Ice Age glacier containing a girl within it, an ancient goddess who had fallen asleep for thousands of years. The men are baffled, and one of them instructs someone to get in touch with the Arcane Court when the goddess asks them to bring the best player of that era to her. In this world, the gods live bored and grant arises to humans superhuman or magical powers that make them apostles and give them the ability to challenge the gods in games. Currently, for the first time, 3 games against gods are happening simultaneously, marking a historic moment where people from all over the world stop to watch. A boy named Faye walks through the streets when he passes by a screen broadcasting the 3 games. Each of them has several players who were striving their hardest to win the challenges. However, despite all the effort, all the more than 100 apostles lose or give up on victory, concluding the 3 games without any wins for humans. Faye finishes watching the broadcast and decides to follow the path as he is also one of the challengers, who is actually well known as several people on the street identify the apostle. The guy goes to a place called the Ruined Branch Office of the Arcane Court, where other challengers recognize him as soon as he arrives. Faye is greeted by the manager Miranda, a person he hadn't seen in 6 months. The two enter the elevator, and the manager explains to Faye that a year ago, an ancient goddess was removed from permanently frozen ground, and she asked for the best player of that era, which is undoubtedly him. Faye remembers the incident as well as the fact that the goddess was taken to the Arcane Court, as it's a nearby location where she was found. Then Miranda explains that she is a peculiar goddess because in the past, she hid during a game of tag with humans, but fell asleep while hiding and took a freezing nap for 3,000 years, and apparently she is the avatar of fire in the form of a dragon. The manager also explains that the girl is a former goddess whose powers have been weakened, although she is still quite powerful, and therefore she should not be provoked because she could easily turn the city to ashes. Faye asks why they are dealing with such a dangerous goddess, and Miranda says that initially, no one knew her capability, but now they want him to keep an eye on the girl. The guy panics upon learning that he had gone there to be a watchdog for a goddess. Miranda explains that humans still don't know the reason for the descent of the higher spiritual beings, the gods, to Earth, and therefore they want to find out why the goddess is still there, and he is the only one capable of performing this task. Faye understands that he is the most qualified because the power of the gods is too great, and they can easily destroy humans. But as he has the Arise, which does not die, he is ideal for dealing with the girl, and Miranda reveals that it was the goddess herself who chose him. Next, the two enter the room where the goddess was waiting, and Faye notices the thousands of games that were everywhere, noticing that she clearly loves games. Then he picks up 2 dice and rolls them to get the numbers he wants. Miranda is puzzled by how he managed to do that, and Faye explains that all he needs to do is leave the opposite sides of the numbers he wants facing up and roll the dice with the perfect force to make them turn around. At that moment, the goddess appears, and Faye immediately notices the resemblance she has to a woman he knew as a child. Miranda introduces him as the best player, who managed to win 3 games against gods in the 3 years he became an apostle, and says he was appointed as a supervisor. Miranda introduces the goddess named Liolxie and asks the guy to introduce himself to her. However, Faye remains paralyzed, observing her resemblance to the person he knew in his past. The 2 girls don't understand what happened to Faye, and Miranda decides to return to her work and leave them alone to get to know each other better. But before leaving, she reminds Faye that he must do his best as a supervisor. As soon as Miranda leaves the room, Liolxie flies closer to Faye and tells them to entertain themselves in a game. The guy tries to say they could just talk, but the goddess says they will introduce themselves in a game. And so Liolxie starts arranging some cards on the table while Faye wonders if that will be one of the games against gods since they were not in the elements, where the challenges happen. Then he notices that the cards have words written on them like names, age, hometown, dreams, and hobbies. The goddess explains that she made that game when she was bored and that it's called the Presentation Memory Game, which has the same rules as a memory game with a deck of cards, but instead of matching identical numbers, you must match a pair of self-presentation topics, and when that happens, the other must introduce themselves according to the card. In other words, if she draws the pair of hometown cards, for example, he must talk about where he came from. After explaining the rules, Liolxie starts shuffling the cards while asking Faye to respond honestly to whatever pairs come up. The guy agrees but asks her to shuffle the cards again because he memorized their positions when the goddess placed them on the table to explain the rules, and he followed them with his eyes as they were being shuffled, an old habit from when he trained with someone in his past. Liolxie is impressed by Faye's skill and admires his desire to play fairly and not cheat to win. Then the goddess finds it a waste for them to play on a table and uses a power to make all the cards float and spin in the air. Faye observes that he never forgets a card, and surely his opponent is also like that, and that way it would make things harder because they would continuously change places. The goddess decides to add one more rule, to limit the participants to a single turn, unlike a regular memory game where whoever finds a pair can repeat the turn. And Faye observes that this makes that game much more than just memorization, which gets them both excited to play. Meanwhile, Miranda watches them through a hidden camera. Faye is the first one to play and draws the cards of hometown and blood type. Due to the theme, he asks if gods have blood. The girl explains that yes, and it's hotter than lava, with a single drop capable of melting that building, but if he wants to know more, he'll need the blood type pair. Next, Leolishi picks a name card and another from hometown. Then, with the first pair of cards revealed, the goddess asks if Faye knows their position, and he effortlessly retrieves them. Leolishi then reveals that her hometown, like that of most gods, is in elements, the place humans call the higher spiritual realm, and need to use a special door to enter. As they play, Miranda recalls that all games against gods take place in elements, and as a prize for winning, apostles can use part of their arise in the real world. The more victories they achieve, the more they can use these powers necessary to discover unexplored lands. In this world, 93% of the planet remains unexplored and harbors large creatures everywhere. Additionally, apostles lose the right to play after 3 defeats and complete the game with 10 victories, which include the celebration as a prize. This is something humanity doesn't understand the meaning of, as no one has ever achieved so many victories. But Miranda thinks perhaps Faye might be able to accomplish this goal. Back to the memory game, Faye comments on Leolishi's swift response regarding her hometown, and the goddess reminds him that it's the rule of the game, and that rules aren't mere restrictions, but a form of entertainment. Later, she gets the pair of name cards. Faye realizes he hasn't introduced himself yet and explains that his name is Faye Theophilus. The goddess then asks if he has a nickname. Faye denies it, but this makes him realize that the game requires not only memorization, but also thinking about what questions to ask with the pairs of cards he acquired to cover as many questions as he wants. Furthermore, since the goal is to get to know the opponent, even if he knows the position of a pair of cards, not picking up some may be the key to victory. He must choose the theme of the cards he picks carefully to gather as much information as possible, since each player has only 1 turn per round. After a while of playing, Faye discovers where the cards he needs are, but at this moment, Leolishi gets a pair he desired, a blank card that allows any question, similar to the Joker in a regular deck of cards. The goddess comments that she really wanted that pair of cards and reminds Faye that she asked him to answer questions honestly. Immediately, she changes her expression and asks what Faye's true reason for wanting to approach her is, making it clear that she won't allow him to lie. Faye observes the power the goddess clearly possesses and recalls again the person from his past. Then he notices that they both were after the Joker pair and that he's enjoying the game, so he decides to be honest. Faye reveals that his task is to keep an eye on Leolishi because Miranda wants to know who she is and what her goals are. The manager panics, thinking that this will make the goddess furious and turn the city into ashes. However, Leolishi says she was already expecting a response like that and thanks Faye for his honesty and for playing with her. Leolishi says she wouldn't ask such a question to a human she doesn't know and asks Faye to call her just Leshy because he doesn't need to be formal with her since he answered her question in line with the game's objective, and the distance between them prevents them from properly enjoying themselves. Then, Leolishi floats the pairs of cards Faye acquired, being dreams, hometown, and hobbies. Faye realizes that the game's goal isn't simply to get the pairs, unlike the original memory game, because it didn't make sense for him to pick the name cards if he already knew his opponent's name. After all, that wouldn't provide any new information and he would have just wasted his turn. That additional rule of always being a single turn forced them both to weigh the cards and information they wanted to acquire. Faye admits that it was an enjoyable adjustment. Then Leolishi asks what Faye would have asked if he had gotten the blank cards. After all, to discover her goals as he wanted, he just needed the pairs of dream cards. Realizing that Leolishi was willing to clear his doubt, Faye asks why the goddess stays in that world and doesn't return to elements, and why she chose him among many other more skilled apostles. Leolishi explains that Faye is the only beginner with 3 victories, something very few achieved in a century, and that's why she wants to finish the game of the gods with him. She reveals that she came to Earth to play with humans, but found out she couldn't return to her world and become a goddess again without getting the 10 victories required in the game of the gods. Faye is surprised and asks if she knows what the celebration is, the prize for those who achieve the 10 victories. The goddess confirms and explains that the human theory is almost correct. The gods will grant 1 wish to the apostle who completes the game. But unlike what humanity deduce, it's not just 1 wish, but as many as the winner wishes to make. Then she pulls him and takes him to the entrance of the Divine Gate, which he recognizes as the dive center. Leolishi then says she's been waiting a long time for a human like him. After that, they both cross the Divine Gate and end up in a higher spiritual realm, where a huge creature resides. Before Faye could process what was happening, a small creature announces the start of the game, a god's tag. God causes a small destruction in the buildings around, making several pieces of the construction fall on top of the participants, and everyone starts using their arises to protect themselves. Leshy wonders why Faye isn't using his power, and he explains that his arise is immortality. At that moment, a huge chunk of debris starts falling right towards the girl. Faye gets worried, but Leshy easily destroys the stone, reminding him that she is an ancient goddess. The girl then says she can't use 100% of her power and finds it cute that the guy was concerned about her. 10 minutes ago, when Faye and Leshy passed through the portal and arrived in Elements, the guy observes that the place looks a bit like the city, and the girl deduces it has something to do with the god of that game, although she's not sure since she doesn't know all the gods. Next, the two see the other participants, and Faye greets a girl named Asta and explains to her that he barely returned and was already dragged to the higher spiritual realm. Leshy takes the opportunity to introduce herself as well, and everyone is shocked to see the ancient goddess there. She explains that she will participate in the game, but reassures them by saying she will be on the human team. At that moment, the small creature appears, welcoming everyone and introducing itself. It says its name is Meep and lives in the territories of the Titan god, and since it was already time, no apostle could sign up for that game anymore. So with the registrations closed, totaling 18 participants, one of them starts recording so the game can be broadcast to the rest of the world. Miranda watches the broadcast, holding on to hope that Faye is capable of fulfilling humanity's mission, winning the games of the gods. Meep informs that it will give the game instructions, and a man reminds that the Titan god likes battle games. Then a girl analyzes the ancient games against that god, realizing that with that number of participants, they will have a 14% chance of winning. The man keeps hope alive as their chances increase in a fighting game with Leshy by their side. However, Meep warns that Titan is tired of battle games, so that one will be a game of tag among the gods, a game none of the participants had heard of until then. Faye asks if it's like a normal game of tag that would happen within the area of the buildings, and Meep confirms, making it clear that it's not allowed to leave the area with light. However, unlike a normal game of tag, they can lose without being tagged, and so Meep finishes explaining the rules of the game, without revealing the other way to lose and without telling them what they would have to do to win. To make matters worse, they would all have 5 minutes to flee, but Titan gets impatient waiting for the time to pass and starts the game before they even have the minutes to run. Back to the present, the participants have difficulty escaping from Titan, who pursues them at high speed. So they all scatter and try to blend in with the shadows of the buildings around, leaving 4 other players with Faye and Leshy, including Asta. One of them suggests that the group hides inside the buildings because even though it's a game of tag, it's safer to hide. Asta thinks it's a good idea and starts heading towards the entrance of a building, moving away from the group. However, Faye asks her to wait and explains that it doesn't seem like a good idea since the god knows their approximate location. At that moment, Titan appears and heads towards the girl, who doesn't even have time to try to run. Everyone thinks Asta will be disqualified from the game, but instead, she remains in Elements, and her body turns red. Then the girl's wind magic starts coming out on its own and attacking her group. With this, Faye immediately realizes that the players caught by the god become his allies, one of the rules that Meep kept hidden. Asta tells everyone to run away, but with her body moving on its own, she ends up hitting 3 players who are lined up against a wall. Titan takes advantage of the moment to step on one of them. However, by doing so, the other 2 who were beside immediately become allies of the god as well, even without being touched. So Leshy and Faye run away, as they were the only ones left nearby, and that place was clearly no longer safe. Titan chases the 2 when suddenly he changes his mind and goes after another target, but Asta appears to continue the pursuit. While fleeing, Faye observes that in just a few seconds, the game went from 18 against 1 to 14 against 5, and if the others are also caught, it will be 17 on the god's team against the 2. Furthermore, the guy notices that only half of Asta's body turned red, which means she wasn't completely out of the game. So, with just a glance at Leshy, his partner understands what he was thinking. The 2 pick up the pace to hide from Asta and attack the girl with a trash can, covering her body to prevent her from releasing her wind magic. Then Leshy touches Asta, causing the girl to return to the human team. Because they discovered the second hidden rule, which allows them to recover lost players, Titan sees the 3 as main targets again and resumes chasing them. For safety, Faye asks Asta to hide somewhere, leaving only him and Leshy to escape from the god. And so the 2 start running again, and Leshy observes that they are just running, but they still don't know how to win. Faye also remembers that Meep said they could lose even without being caught, so they have to find out the winning condition as soon as possible. As the 2 were thinking in complete synchrony, Leshy observes that they think alike and that Faye is taking the game very seriously. The guy confirms and says that game is quite exciting. The ancient goddess is happy and says that when humans take games against gods seriously, they become more fun, which reminds Faye of the girl from his past who said games are for fun. However, despite finding the game exciting, Faye still wanted to discover the condition for winning. The two keep running until they are surrounded by the other 15 players who ended up being caught. In other words, only Faye, Glacier, and Asta remain on the humans' team, totaling 3 and 16, including the Titan. So they flee into a building, and the goddess destroys the connection it had with a neighboring building to prevent the Titan's allies from following them, gaining them a few seconds. However, the god was also on his way, and they still had to figure out how to win. Reflecting on this, Faye realizes they needed to make the players switch sides, finally unraveling all the hidden rules of that game, which was a mix of tag, hide and seek, and another game, one he doesn't need to mention because Leshy understands immediately what the guy meant. And so, knowing what they had to do to win, the two split up, with Leshy in charge of luring the other players out of the building, while Faye decides to head up to the rooftop. As they both proceed with the plan, the Titan god destroys all the buildings around, and Faye realizes he's planning to checkmate the game and hopes they can execute the plan in time. Then, as soon as he reaches the rooftop, the Titan finishes destroying the surrounding buildings and heads to the only one left, where Faye is to end the game with his own hands. And thus, the god hits Faye, making all the other players lame at having one less player on the human team. However, contrary to what everyone thinks, the guy remains on the same team thanks to his power to not die because his Arise is actually God's favorite, which allows him to escape from that tag rule of the game. But still, at the moment, the game is 16 against 3. However, Faye tells the Titan that unlike what he thinks, that is about to change because the hidden game in that tag is Reversey. So the guy explains that throughout the game, he realized that the city symbolizes a board, and they are the pieces. The god's team plays first and takes the pieces for themselves, which is when a person is tagged. Then the humans play and manage to make the players return to the human team as if the piece were flipped. Furthermore, Reversey is a game that ends when the board is full and no more moves are possible. And in that scenario, it's when all the buildings are destroyed, where the winner is whoever has more pieces on the board. Additionally, Faye explains that when a guy was tagged by the Titan and 2 others changed teams as well, even without being tagged, it was because they were thrown against the wall in a way that they were lined up, which according to the rules of Reversey, would flip them to the opposing team. Then the guy finally reveals that his goal was to distract the Titan for Leshy and Asta to take action. At that moment, the girls come out of hiding and Asta throws 7 participants against the wall, leaving them lined up as before. Then they touch 2 people, causing everyone in the rows to be reversed, changing the score to 10 humans against Man the God's team, just in time for the last building to collapse completely. And thus, the game ends with the humans as the winners, with the Titan god accepting his defeat. With the game over, everyone returns to the human world and Miranda celebrates the victory, as it had been 35 days since humanity last won against the gods, making the tag game receive the highest viewership in the world. She thanks Faye for giving them that victory and asks how it was for him to partner with the former goddess because the two were so in sync that they didn't seem like a newly formed duo. Faye says it was amazing how the two understood each other with just a glance and comments that the former goddess is truly impressive, as if that were the reason for their teamwork result. But Miranda says she doesn't think it happened because she was a former goddess, but because it was him and Leshy working together. She also mentions that the former goddess used to play alone before meeting him, making the guy remember his past when he also used to play alone. Miranda continues to say that even at that time, Leshy was very strong and had no opponents, but now that the two are working as a team, Faye can finally fulfill his dream of beating the god's game and winning whatever prize he wants. After that, Faye goes to Leshy's room, where he meets the former goddess, who was watching recordings of the tag game for the 4th time, to analyze what the two could have done differently. Leshy decides to take that time to find out what Faye wants to achieve by beating the game. After all, she wanted to become a complete goddess again, but he hadn't told her yet what he wanted as a reward. So the guy explains that he wants to find a person he used to play with when he was a child who taught him everything about games. Faye recounts that despite always losing in all games, the woman accepted all his challenges with a smile until one day she left, promising they would see each other again, and since then he has wanted to see the person again to thank her, as she was responsible for him getting to where he is. Leshy finds the wish interesting but asks Faye if he has any other clues besides the fact that she used to play. But the guy says he doesn't know her name and doesn't remember her face or voice. The only thing he remembers is that the woman had red hair, just like Leshy. Faye mentions that when he met the former goddess, he wondered if the two had any relation, but Leshy recalls she was trapped in ice for 3,000 years. However, despite not knowing the girl, she hopes Faye can fulfill his wish to find her. So Faye thinks that finding someone who's so similar to the person he's looking for might have been fate, and now the two are partners and will fight to beat the gods game. Later, Leshy informs Miranda that she and Faye have decided to form a team. However, the manager explains that just the two of them don't meet the minimum number of participants required for the games. Faye explains that they went there exactly because she knows better how many people the two of them will need on the team. Then Miranda complains to them because she was already in her pajamas and thought she would finally be able to rest after a long day of work. Then she starts complaining to the two of them for bothering her, and they immediately start apologizing. Afterwards, the manager explains that the Arcane Court recommends that a group have 10 or more people because statistics from the last 30 years show that groups with fewer than 9 people have a winning rate of less than 4%, while those with 10 or more have a 9% win rate, and those with over 20 people have an 11% win rate. In other words, the more members in the group, the better. However, Leshy doesn't like the idea because she thinks it's better to have a team with just the two of them than to have other participants who don't like playing. Because of this, Miranda advises them to form an alliance with teams that have few people and says she trusts Faye to recruit good players. The guy questions this, saying that getting that done is Faye's job, but the manager explains that it's necessary for the two of them to find people who match with them, and after saying this, she finally goes to rest. The next day, Faye meets Leshy at a place he explains is the consultation section. He tells her that he had already made a virtual member call because all team applications are digital, and if someone looking for players shows up, he'll call him. However, in some cases, like not being able to reach a partner, it's better to have an in-person consultation, so some players looking for a team may appear in the consultation section. For this reason, Faye decides to stay there waiting to see if anyone showed up while contacting some teams to see if they accept the two of them. He starts by calling Ashlan, a captain of a team called Blaze. As soon as he answers, the guy shows great excitement for Faye to join his team. After all, he's a highly skilled novice player who still doesn't have a team. However, as soon as Faye mentions that he's also with the former goddess, Ashlan hangs up on him. Faye doesn't understand and calls back. Then the captain answers and asks if it can only be him joining the team because the goddess is involved in an incident. Realizing that Faye doesn't know anything, Ashlan explains that Leshy doesn't accept anyone insulting the game of the gods, and after a defeat, a certain team ended up frustrated with the games. After getting drunk, they started saying that the games were just nonsense, and the goddess ended up overhearing the group complaining. Then the 12 apostles ended up in the hospital, and the event became known as the Bloody Incident with the goddess. At that moment, Faye questions Leshy's attitude, who doesn't know what to say and explains that she didn't control her strength well that day. Then Ashlan, not knowing that Leshy was near the call, explains to Faye that he regrets it, but he won't be able to accept the goddess on his team, even though she looks like a beautiful girl, albeit with a little bust. The captain's comment about Leshy's body makes her completely dissatisfied and a little insecure, so Faye quickly hangs up the call with his friend and reassures the girl. Later, he analyzes the options and decides to call a team called Black Rose because they have an excellent game analyst. He tells Leshy that it's common for teams to have someone responsible for researching and analyzing game content as well as having coaches who train them. And so Faye calls Captain Yuki from the team he's interested in. The girl confirms that her group needs new members but warns that many players have already shown interest in joining the team and failed because they are very demanding. But as it's Faye, she says she can get him a spot right away. Faye thanks her and asks the captain if she wouldn't accept another person on the team with him. Yuki becomes interested in hearing Faye's recommendation, but when she finds out it's the former goddess, the girl panics and hangs up the call. Then Faye asks what else Leshy has been up to. She tries to say she hasn't done anything, but starts talking in a strange way, which makes Faye suspicious that the goddess is lying. Under pressure, Leshy ends up confessing that for the past 6 months she's been idle and has been practicing battle games with humans in the underground coliseum, and her first opponent was Yuki. However, Leshy explains that at the time she still couldn't control her power well and ended up leaving the girl quite traumatized. Faye scolds Leshy and realizes that the two of them won't be able to join existing teams. The goddess feels guilty about it and says she just wanted to learn more about humans. Faye understands her, knowing that the girl has even read several books about human knowledge to better understand them. Then he says that since the two of them can't join any existing teams, they can recruit skilled players to create their own team, like someone with teleportation powers. Just then, a girl with that ability appears, which immediately interests the duo. After all, that power is very useful and functional. They follow the girl to the consultation section counter, where they hear her say she came there to retire. Then Leshy quickly burns the girl's retirement paper, leaving her puzzled. Then the girl recognizes the dragon goddess and Faye, the skilled beginner, who explains that the two of them are looking for companions to play. She completely denies the idea of joining their team, but ends up agreeing to talk about it when Faye suggests they grab something to eat. And so she says her name is Pearl Diamond, she's 16 years old and has 1 win and 1 loss in the games of the gods. Faye finds it strange that the girl has a very powerful ability and still wants to retire because of just 1 defeat. After all, for an apostle, the game is like a job, just like for sports professionals who work hard every day to improve themselves and gain fans and autograph requests for the results. While Faye ponders the matter and checks the girl's data, Leshy watches Pearl summoning a new tub of ice cream one after another, and before the guy realizes it, she's already eaten 35 servings. Later, Faye reports that she checked the system for data on her defeat, and the girl explains that this is the reason for her retirement. Her power allows her not only to teleport humans and objects, but also to swap things around as she did with the sweets. Pearl recounts that in the match she lost, the rule was to protect the leader, but when the god approached, she became so terrified at the thought of being crushed that she accidentally activated her power and swapped places with the team captain, leading to the defeat of all participants. Because of this, she wishes to retire. Faye observes that Pearl may have been responsible for a defeat, but she surely must have saved many people with her power. However, this doesn't cheer up the girl, who explains that she couldn't meet expectations since swapping places isn't as good an ability as it seems. It requires touching the object for 3 minutes beforehand to work. Pearl admits she even messes up measuring time, and due to losing control of her power and being clumsy and scared, some colleagues had to retire after losing 3 games. Additionally, she mentions that she only achieved 1 victory because of her team. Then Leshier remarks that Pearl is belittling the gods by thinking that a team with deadweight could win a match. The goddess makes it clear that they won't blame her even if they lose due to a mistake, as it's something normal to happen. Despite the goddess and Faye's proposal, Pearl remains intent on retiring and leaves through a portal, leaving the two alone. This makes the guy remember once again the person who used to play with him in his childhood, who said that games are meant to be fun. When Leshy asks if they're going after another person, Faye says they'll research which dormitory Pearl is in because he finds it a waste for things to end like this. The goddess asks if Faye thinks this because of the girl's power, and he explains that he doesn't actually want Pearl to retire because that way she'll be afraid of games for the rest of her life, which would be a real waste. And so the two head to Pearl's room. They ring the bell, but no one answers, and Leshy discovers that the door is open. Faye fears that Pearl has already left and enters desperately searching for her, but in doing so, he catches the girl changing clothes. After Pearl dresses, she explains that she usually uses portals to enter her room and thus forgot to lock the door, feeling embarrassed that the guy saw her changing. Next, the girl explains that she became a player at the same time as Faye and always admired him for being so good right off the bat, which is why she doesn't think she's the ideal person to join his team because she would only be a burden to everyone. Faye disagrees when he notices several bags in Pearl's room. The girl explains that she prepared snacks as a way to apologize to her former colleagues for making them lose the game, but none of them accepted the apology and even said she wasn't worthy to see the team captain. Leshy gets irritated with the situation and says that none of the team members, not even she, understand that whether winning or losing, what matters is having fun and playing again, as well as understanding that it's natural for a god to win in a game of gods. And for this reason, it's not fair to put all the responsibility for the defeat on one person. Pearl is happy to see how Leshy thinks, but insists that there's nothing she can do about the situation. So Faye tells the girl that she can clear her name. He suggests that the 3 of them play a game with Pearl's old team to help them win and show her potential, because even though it's frustrating to end a game with a loss, it was just 1 loss and she still has the right to challenge the gods in other matches. Pearl is unsure of what to choose, and Faye tells her that they'll try at least once and he won't insist afterward. So the girl is moved by the way she was recruited by the 2 and agrees to participate in a game of the gods with them. However, when the time for the match arrives, Pearl becomes completely nervous from the way her former teammates are staring at her. Before they enter the higher spiritual realm, Miranda appears and informs Faye that she had to break rules to tell him the day Pearl's old team called Inferno would play, and for this reason, it's important that they win. Additionally, they attract a lot of viewership. Then Miranda reminds Pearl that the whole world will be watching the match and she must do her best. This makes the girl even more nervous, but Leshy reminds her that the goal of the 3 of them is to have fun. The players begin to pass through the portal to go to the elements, and the goddess starts to take Pearl. Still, the girl remains desperate and says she's not ready. Then Faye reminds her that they make up for mistakes with victory. And so, after Pearl receives all the support, the 3 pass through the portal and end up in the sky. Suddenly, something enormous appears below the clouds, and Faye recognizes that it's the game against the god of despair, Ouroboros, responsible for the defeat of several apostles who lost the game without being able to do anything. However, instead of being worried, the guy gets excited about the idea of challenging the god at his own game. Despite the excitement about the new match, the 3 still need to find some solution to withstand the fall. Faye thinks that teleportation would be a good way out, but Pearl explains that her power has a limit of 100 feet, which wouldn't help much at that height. So Leshy uses her ability to make them fall at a slower and safer speed. However, as they approach Uroboro's body, the girl encounters obstacles. But despite not having a very good landing, everyone falls safely. They meet with Pearl's and Faye's former group, and Faye asks them to exchange some information. A man introduces himself as the captain of the Inferno team, Orvin Miskets, and greets Pearl, who immediately apologizes to him for what happened in the last game. Orvin reveals that 4 apostles have already been eliminated, 3 of them didn't survive the fall and returned to the real world, while a 4th was caught by flying whales, which the Arcane Court calls leviathans, creatures that wait for humans to fall from Uroboros back to devour them. The situation of that game worries some participants because if they lose the match, they would have to retire, but the captain motivates his team, reminding everyone that the game is being broadcasted to the world. At that moment, Faye notices the sadness of that sad game at corner, thinking it's useless to explain the gods' challenge since no one has ever managed to win. Faye grabs the creature, which reveals that Uroboros is playing Forbidden Word, where the objective is for them to make the gods say a certain word, which is the condition to win. However, figuring out what the word is part of the challenge, which excites Faye. The group discovers that Uroboros' body is very large, measuring 10,000 meters, being by far the largest god. Suddenly, they all fall into a trap, and the Meep explains that they will only be able to leave that place when they discover what the forbidden word is. Leshy says that surely the word has something to do with the game, and everyone starts making attempts when the Meep remembers to warn that they have already said the forbidden word at some point in that match, prompting all players to try to remember everything they have said. But even with several guesses, Faye is the one who guesses the word ouch, which Leshy and Pearl said when they fell, something that has been said twice. And so the group is free from the trap and moves to another part of the god's body. On the way, Faye observes that Uroboros does not speak the language of humans, and for this reason, the condition for victory should not be literally to make him say the forbidden word, but to make him express some kind of pain. So the guy steps harder on Uroboros' body, but doesn't even tickle. Then Captain Orvin and the rest of the Inferno team use their powers, attempting to cause some damage. But as it also doesn't work, Leshy decides to use all the goddess strength she has, and the impact of the attack creates a gust of wind, causing some participants to fly away and be eliminated by the Leviathans. Seeing what her action caused, Leshy immediately apologizes to the group, and Captain Orvin accepts the dragon goddess apology but notes that there was no sign that the damage caused any pain to Uroboros. Faye notes that they are in a game of wisdom, and therefore they will only be able to win when they find a way to make the god utter the forbidden word. At that moment, the Meep, who is clearly very forgetful, remembers a secret rule that he forgot to tell the players and explains that if they perform a specific action, something will happen, and when that happens, it is possible to release the second secret rule for just a moment. Then Pearl realizes that the Leviathans, Uroboros' subordinates, are following the group, which makes the girl afraid. She runs to Faye for safety, unless she grabs her to remind the girl that they went there for her to show her potential to the Inferno team, which won't happen if she just keeps crying. Pearl realizes that her friend is right and promises to make an effort, so the two girls set out to search, and after a while searching, they find Uroboros' tail, which has a scale of a different color from the others, making the place stand out. Pearl gets excited about the idea of having found the god's weak point and ends up not paying attention to Faye, who says he has a bad feeling about it, making the guy remember that manager Miranda had talked about having some players who assume things on their own. However, he realizes that it's valid to conduct a test and tells Pearl to attack, but as a precaution, to retreat immediately after hitting the weak point. The girl agrees and draws Captain Orvin's attention so he can pay attention to her. Then Pearl punches Uroboros' tail and the place lights up. Faye deduces that the blow made the god angry. So as Pearl didn't retreat as requested, Leshy goes to her, making both of them duck just in time to prevent being hit by several attacks that the tail launches in different spots. With that, several players are hit and eliminated, as well as some Leviathans that were nearby. Orvin realizes that it was a trap and says that ill-thought-out actions bring danger to the group. Pearl apologizes to everyone and says she was just trying to be helpful, but Faye reassures her, saying that if she hadn't tried, he wouldn't have because it was important to check the theory. After all, they were in a game where the only option was to test the possibilities to reach the victory condition. Faye also makes it clear that even if he had been eliminated in that attempt, he wouldn't blame her for it because the most important thing of all is not to pressure a colleague who makes a mistake. Then Faye says that contrary to what Captain Orvin thought, he doesn't think the tail activated a trap because a god like Uroboros wouldn't be happy to catch just a few players, and for that reason, That must be some way for them to achieve victory, probably the first secret rule that the meat mentioned. Orvin completely disagrees with Faye. After all, several were eliminated with that action. However, the guy says that in fact there were only 4 participants, and if Ouroboros really wanted to, he could have eliminated many more. Leshy acknowledges that it is indeed very suspicious that hundreds of lights missed the target. So Orvin asks what Faye intends to do, and he replies that the next step is to discover the second secret rule of the game. And although he has no idea what it is, the match has no time limit, so they can focus on just achieving the goal. Then Faye sits down to analyze the situation calmly, reflecting on what the reason for the second secret rule of the game being something temporary might be, as well as all the possibilities they haven't tested yet. However, instead of the other players doing the same as him, Team Inferno begins to grow impatient and think about giving up, since the Arcane Court allows withdrawal without reason in matches against the god Ouroboros. Captain Orvin then remembers that giving up would force some teammates to retire because they already had 2 other defeats. This makes everyone remember that this way out would be an option if it weren't for Pearl's mistake in the game they played together 6 months ago. And they start yelling at the girl, who feels bad about the situation and guilty. Leshy immediately gets angry at seeing the group humiliating Pearl and says that if they want to leave so badly, she can return them to the real world herself. However, she then calms down and explains that she didn't get angry in that way because of the discord they have with Pearl, but because everyone is upset, even though they are in such an exciting and fun game. The group finds it strange that Leshy is enjoying that situation and thinks it's because she's a goddess, but the girl observes that Faye is a human, clearly enjoying every moment of the game. The guy kept reflecting on what happened when Pearl activated the first secret rule when he decides to activate it again. He warns that this will probably result in more casualties than last time, but tells the other players that even if they lose, they should keep watching the match via transmission because he promises to win. Next, Faye asks Leshy to hit Ouroboros' tail as hard as she can. The former goddess obeys and launches a mega attack, causing all the thorns in the region to light up, unlike last time when it was only 1. As a result, a jet of powerful lights is released, hitting everything around, eliminating all the players except Faye, Pearl, and Leshy, who protect the 2 from the counterattack. The blow irritates the nearby Leviathans, causing them to start trying to attack Ouroboros. Pearl asks why the god's subordinates would be doing that, and Faye says that no one ever said what they were in the game, and with that reaction, it is possible to understand that they are neutral monsters. Next, the guy grabs Pearl and takes them both onto the Leviathans, while he realizes that Ouroboros has finally started to move. Leshy also mounts one of the flying whales, and thus they discover that the second secret rule is that by attacking the god's tail and him counterattacking, it is possible to use the Leviathans for some period. At that moment, the Meep appears all happy that someone has finally reached the last part of the game, with only them left to make Ouroboros feel pain and say the forbidden word. Leshy notes that first they need to discover the god's true weak point, and Faye deduces that it's on the underside of his body. After all, they hadn't found Ouroboros' eyes anywhere above, and the weak point can only be in a location that can be found only when mastering the Leviathans. And so finally, the trio finds Ouroboros' eyes, being his true weak point. However, as they get closer, they discover a defense system. When approaching one of the eyes, the other one launches attacks, making it necessary to think of a method to approach safely. Suddenly, Faye and Pearl realize that the eyes of the Leviathan they are riding started blinking, deducing it to be a way to indicate that their time controlling the creature was ending. Then Leshy springs into action while Faye whispers something in Pearl's ear and asks her to do what he instructed at the right moment. Next, the Leviathan rises high and Faye jumps to another creature, trusting Pearl to succeed in his plan. He draws Ouroboros' attention so that Leshy can approach without being caught. The idea works, and the goddess strikes one of Ouroboros' eyes, causing it to crack. However, the other eye launches an attack at the girl, making her fall. But that was also part of the plan. Next, Faye approaches to finish her attack. Captain Orvin and his team watch the match's transmission and think the guy won't be able to deliver the blow in time before the other eye launches its attack. However, moments before that happens, Faye gives the order to Pearl, who uses her teleportation to take him to where she and Leshy were. As a result, the attack launched by one eye goes straight to the other, which was already cracked because of the former goddess of blow, causing it to shatter completely, because the condition for victory is that Ouroboros would defeat himself. And so the god screams in pain, and everyone watching the transmission celebrates, including Orvin's team, who realize that although they were eliminated, the victory goes to the entire group, making the captain realize that Pearl redeemed herself with all of them. When the game ends, Ouroboros appears, acknowledging his defeat in the match. She also hands Faye a special reward for defeating Ouroboros for the first time. a fragment of his eye being a god's crown, which allows whoever has it to summon him. Ouroboros also promises to make her game 100 times more difficult and challenges the trio to participate in it. A few days later, a girl named Nell Reckless dreams once again about a game she participated in and wakes up startled. Then she realizes she left the TV on broadcasting the match that Faye won against Ouroboros, and after observing his playing style, Nell decides to dedicate her life to Faye. Meanwhile, Leshy complains to Miranda upon discovering that they won't be able to participate in their branch's games, even though they managed to recruit Pearl to join the team. The manager explains that they can't participate due to the huge waiting list of players, something that happened precisely because of Faye and Lesha, as Ouroboros' defeat is unprecedented in history and stimulated many apostles to participate. A branch team made a request at the same time as the three of them. However, Leshy refuses to give up on participating and decides to forcefully steal the Divine Gate. Faye then comments to Miranda that they need to do something because the former goddess may cause trouble if deprived of games. Miranda agrees and suggests that the group participate in the World Games Championship. And so the team takes a train trip to the city of the Malra Sacred Source to participate in the World Championship. Along the way, Pearl notes that they can't even thank the people who retired and used their arises to protect the city and develop the outside world. They also remember that Miranda explained that the World Games Championship is a competition to which athletes from all over the world are invited. She also mentioned that Ouroboros' defeat led to the three of them receiving many requests from different cities to participate in the championship, as apostles who win difficult matches against gods are treated as heroes. After the manager explains everything to the team, Pearl uses a dart game to decide which of the cities that invited them they should go to. The girl is excited that they can choose and feels honored to be in charge of deciding this, and her dart ends up hitting the city of the Malra Sacred Source, thus determining the group's destination. In the present, after a long journey, the trio arrives at the location and Leshy is excited to explore the game stores and discover which games are famous there, but Faye reminds them that they should first visit the Malra branch. At that moment, Pearl notices a girl, Nell, with a welcome sign for Faye's team, which makes the three of them find it a bit suspicious. After all, she was a complete stranger. Nell had been looking for them everywhere when she notices Faye and the girls looking at her. The trio is startled by Nell's excitement and decides to flee, but she uses her arise, which gives her absurd speed and easily catches up with the group. Faye is impressed by the girl's superhuman physical strength and asks if she is an apostle. Nell then introduces herself and explains that she's a former player from the city of Malra who watched his match against Ouroboros and decided to be his subordinate. The conversation attracts the curiosity of the people around, and Faye doesn't know how to respond or what the girl meant by being his subordinate. Nell explains that she would do anything for him, like cooking or washing his clothes, but this embarrasses Faye even more. He asks for support from Leshy and Pearl to get rid of the situation, but the two judge him, thinking that Faye has some interest in the unknown girl. So Nell begs Faye again to allow her to be his subordinate, and he takes advantage of the girl not looking to run away from there. Nell sees the trio fleeing and runs to catch up with them, forgetting to check the street before crossing. When she realizes she sees a moving car right in her direction, and to avoid being hit, she uses her power to kick the car away. Her plan works, but only later Nell realizes that her action put the driver's life in danger. Worried that she caused an accident, she ends up falling behind, and Faye and his team manage to reach the Malra branch without being followed. As soon as they arrive, he notices the statue of the water spirit, Undine, when the people around recognize him as the apostle who defeated Ouroboros. Then, a tall man appears behind Pearl, and she is startled by his presence. She runs to ask for help from the local guard, thinking the man was someone dangerous, but then discovers that he is the manager of the Malra branch of the Arcane Court, named Balegar Lans. The manager takes the team up the stairs of the building to his office on the 8th floor, refusing to take the elevator due to it being a healthier option, which leaves Pearl a bit sad about having to climb so many flights of stairs. On the way, Balegar explains that the main event of the World Games Championship will be in 3 days during the Gods' Play. For the event, they rented the city's sports stadium and sold 10,000 tickets. Balegar also says that the next day there will be an intermunicipal match, and he would like the three of them to participate because several players want to compete with the former goddess and with Faye, known as the best rookie in recent years. Faye agrees to participate, and Pearl is delighted by the popularity of their group, thinking that she must also be becoming famous for participating in the game where Ouroboros was defeated. But as the manager remains silent, the girl worries that her popularity may not be as good as Faye and Leshy's. Later, Balegar takes the trio to a room to show several photos of the previous year's World Games Championship, including those of the people who came to the city as guests at the time. Leshy notices that in one of the photos, the team wears black uniforms, and Faye remembers that that color belongs to the best team of the branch. The manager takes the opportunity to explain that the golden embroidery on the uniform indicates that it belongs to the main branch of the Arcane Court. At that moment, an apostle in a black uniform named Dax Gear appears and recognizes the team as visitors from the ruined branch due to the uniform's blue embroidery. Balagar observes that the player always seeks to meet the visitors before the games and begins to introduce Dax to the group, but the guy interrupts the manager to introduce himself. Dax also treats Faye's group like any other, which makes Balagar reprimand him. After all, that's the team the former goddess belongs to. However, the guy doesn't care about it and makes it clear that he won't give them any special treatment because he's only interested in knowing if the three of them are good players or not. Leshy is happy to meet an apostle who only has eyes for games, and Pearl notices that Dax wears a black uniform. The manager then explains that he is a newcomer who joined the branch a year ago and assembled his team much faster than anyone else in the world, besides winning against a god in his first match. He also mentions that so far, Dax has won 3 games and lost 2, becoming the current representative of the Malware branch. Impressed, Pearl comments that the guy is a prodigy just like Faye. Dax agrees, stating that the 2 players were destined to meet. He also praises Faye's victory against the gods Titan and Ouroboros and invites him to join his team, named Tempest Cruiser. Dax explains that he is gathering talented players from around the world because he intends to form the strongest team in history and completely dominate the game of the gods, with Faye being the missing piece. However, Faye thanks him for the invitation and compliments, but clarifies that he came to the city only to participate in the World Games Championship. Dax accepts his refusal and leaves, although it seems he is not giving up on getting what he wants. Later, Faye talks to his team and explains that he has been thinking about what kind of game they will participate in, and in his research, he accidentally came across information about Nell. He reveals that she retired a month ago with 3 wins and 3 losses, and although not a very special number from what he saw, she was a good player because she followed the captain's orders well and cared about supporting her teammates. However, in a game called God's Statue, where 3 players were needed to press a button, the group used the 4th participant as bait to attract the attention of the god. But when that participant was disqualified, they all panicked upon seeing that the god went into full surveillance, and the captain ended up surrendering without even trying to find another solution. With most giving up, Nell lost the game, even though she begged her team not to give up victories so easily, as they could very well have tried to win with just 3 players, even if they didn't have bait to distract the god. With this game, Nell acquired 3 losses and was forced to retire. Faye comments that he was curious about the match, and Pearl observes that Nell was the opposite of her because she had a defeat due to her own mistake, and was choosing to retire of her own free will, unlike Nell, who acquired a defeat because of her team and was forced into retirement even though she probably wanted to continue participating in the games of the gods. Faye agrees that Pearl may be right and regrets running away from Nell before she could explain her situation better. At that moment, the doorbell rings and Pearl goes to answer, thinking it's the manager, Balagar. However, upon opening the door, she discovers Nell pretending to be a room service employee. Nell tries to maintain her disguise, but everyone recognizes her by her voice and hair color. Then Nell runs away before Faye could explain that he wants to talk to her. After stopping running, Nell wonders why she fled like that when Dax appears and says that doing something so pathetic doesn't suit her. He continues, saying that they both entered the branch as colleagues 2 years ago, but unlike her, he survived. Dax then asks what sets them apart, and Nell braces herself to hear something offensive, but he replies that the difference between them was just the team, because despite her ability, she was unlucky with her allies. Next, Dax asks Nell to join his team to help with her skills as an analyst, but she declines the invitation, stating that she has already decided to only be part of Faye's team and doesn't want to be part of any other group. However, she suggests that they make a bet involving the victory of Faye's team in the next day's game, called a friendly match, confidently betting that Faye will win. And so the next day, the trio prepares to play, excited to participate in a championship at a venue as grand as that sports stadium. Before they go, Nell shows up to warn them that, as they already know, their opponents will be Dax's team, and even for someone like Faye, it won't be an easy match because Dax's natural sense for games is undeniable. But even so, she says she'll be cheering for the 3 in the audience, and they must win no matter what. The trio is surprised to learn that Nell came there just to tell them that she'll be rooting for them, but are happy nonetheless. Then the team heads to the stadium, where a huge crowd awaits. Dax greets them and makes it clear that he came there to be the winner and is not willing to be humiliated, and Faye observes that his opponent is intense, making it clear that this is a compliment. Dax explains that his way of acting depends on his opponent, and to make it a fair match, a random game will be selected from the thousands installed at the venue. Then Dax asks the operator to start the selected game, and an augmented reality video appears, causing various data to appear throughout the stadium, much to Faye's surprise. The game is a card-based strategy called Mental Arena, with both Dax and Faye having no prior familiarity with the game, which makes it a challenge for all involved. The game allows only 2 players for each team, and Dax calls Kelrich to be his partner, while Faye chooses Pearl, who is already much more confident about the games, and Leshy cheers for them. The operator explains that there are 2 ways to win Mental Arena: either be the first to reach the last space or deplete an opponent's life points. Additionally, the game features classes: Mage, who deals +1 damage in their attacks; Healer, who gains +1 healing; Traveler, who can move +1 space; and Trapper, who nullifies traps or gains the power to enhance them. Before choosing their classes, 5 random cards are distributed to each player, and it's explained that there are 72 magic cards divided into 3 types: Attack, capable of causing damage to the opponent; Recovery, capable of restoring life; and Special cards. The used cards are stored in the team's repository, and Faye remarks that the game is a battle of wits. He also analyzes a special card he received, which can only be used by a healer, while Pearl shows she has a rare card, which can only be activated when having 5 or fewer life points and only 1 card in hand. Faye reflects a bit on the cards, which have interesting effects but very strict conditions, and chooses to be an adventurer to advance more spaces, while Pearl chooses to be a healer to protect their lives, both classes aiming to reach the last space first. However, Faye realizes that Dax fits the profile of a player who finds it boring to win only by reaching the objective, and as expected, he and his partner choose the Mage class, whose focus is to deal damage to opponents. Next, it's explained that they can choose from the dice card's numbers between 1 to 6, and that there are golden spaces, where it's possible to draw 2 magic cards, and silver spaces, where it's possible to draw 1 card, but if more than 1 player lands on the same space, none of them can buy cards. Additionally, there's a red space, which contains a trap that deals 7 damage. Faye observes that if the method to achieve victory is to reach the end, the ideal is to choose the number 6, the highest possible number. However, there's the option of following the path or using the cards, and Leshy and Nell observe that from the beginning, one must bet on which of the 2 ways to follow. Then, everyone chooses the number of dice cards, and the turn order is decided by the highest number rolled. However, Faye and Dax both roll a 6, and since it's a tie, Faye goes first for having chosen his class first. But as both land on the same silver space, neither can buy a new card, and Dax finds his opponent's decision strange because, as an adventurer, he could have chosen to use his bonus to land on the 7th space and get a card. Faye explains that he won't use his adventurer ability at this moment, and Dax realizes he was preventing him from buying something. Afterward, Faye asks the operator if it's possible to exchange cards with the partner, who responds that although not allowed, there's something similar to exchanging hands among the magic cards. Upon hearing the answer, Faye winks at Pearl and ends his turn, leading to Dax's turn. The guy uses a special barrier card used only by a mage called Fervent Rhythm, which affects all players and lasts until the end of the game. The card causes both the recipient and the attacker to receive 1 damage with each attack. This makes Pearl wonder why Dax chose the card, as he will also be affected by it. With the end of the turn, it's Pearl's turn, who simply advances to a silver space and adds a card to her hand, passing the turn to Kelrich. The girl stops at a golden space and gains 2 cards. Then she uses an attack to deal 1 damage to each opponent. But thanks to Fervent Rhythm, both end up receiving 4 damage, making them realize that if they don't do something about that power, they will continue losing life points until being annihilated. Dax observes that his opponent chose to reach the end faster, while he has already chosen to use his powers to defeat him. Next, Coverage continues her turn using a new attack called Repulsion Chains, another barrier magic that lasts until the end of the game. And thus, the girl finishes her turn, and it's Faye's turn again, who struggles not to let his true objective show, which is to make Pearl use a card that will defeat the opponents. Then they select a number from 1 to 6 again, and Pearl chooses to stop the same space as Kelrich, to prevent her from replenishing her hand. Additionally, she also attacks with a high-speed spell, which allows it to be used out of turn. The card called Great Flame, which she renames as Pearl's Game, attacks Dax, dealing him 3 damage, 1 more than it should, thanks to Fervent Rhythm. However, the girl also receives 2 damage, thanks to the 2 magic barriers that deal damage to whoever attacks. Then Dax decides to retaliate using the Snowstorm card, which he renames Dax as Lightning because he found the idea of Pearl giving her own name to the cards brilliant. The attack lowers Pearl's life to 8, while he remains at 15. Next, Kelrich casts a spell of lightning from the heavens, causing 4 damage to her, thanks to the 2 magic barriers, in exchange for dealing 7 damage to Pearl, which lowers the girl's life to 1. The girl uses a healing card to raise her life points, but Dax takes action, using a card that nullifies the opponent's healing, preventing her from avoiding the damage. Counting the effects of the two magic barriers, Pearl is left with 0 life. However, Faye protects his partner with a card called Heart Bandages, which reduces the damage, keeping Pearl with 1 life point. Next, the guy starts his turn and activates an attack spell that deals 5 damage to Dax, leaving him with only 8 life points. He also uses a card called Sacrifice of the Soul to store a card from his hand in the depot and recover 3 damage from himself and his ally. Then Pearl plays 2 cards that restore 9 life points. Leshy and Nell notice that Faye and Pearl manage to turn the tide, and Dax's life is dwindling, despite him and his partner still having 6 cards up their sleeves. In the 3rd round, each one chooses a number from 1 to 6 to move, and Faye and Pearl are surprised to see Dax choose a number to land on the red square, which has a trap that deals 7 damage. On Pearl's turn, she draws 2 cards and discards 1 to use a barrier spell, nullifying the damage from the next attack she'll receive. Then, Faye uses the Traveler's ability to move an extra space. Kelrich notes that Faye is avoiding spending the cards from his hand as a precaution and praises Pearl's protection spell, but predicts her downfall despite all precautions. Then the girl casts Grand Flame to remove her opponent's protective barrier. Next, Kelrich plays a spell card called Absolute Equality, which forces all players to draw or discard until they have 4 cards in hand, and to finish, she uses a dimensional spell, which has no effect and ends her turn. After that, Dax lands on the red square and uses a restraint spell to transfer the damage caused by the trap to Pearl, something Faye had already anticipated. With the Fervent Rhythm, she loses 8 life points, leaving her with nothing. Then Faye again plays a card to save his partner, but Dax was already expecting him to try something and plays a card to prevent Faye from using any cards until the end of the phase. Pearl becomes worried, but Faye reassures her that they'll manage to win. However, Kelrich informs that now that everyone has finished their moves, her dimensional spell is activated as per the card's condition. It deals 10 damage to each player who drew 4 or more cards during the round, fitting Pearl, who was forced to draw 4 cards due to the Absolute Equality spell, something Kelrich had planned. The girl had 5 life points and ends up receiving 10 damage, making Kelrich think victory is assured. But Pearl is determined to prove to everyone that she's not a burden to Faye and casts a card called Last Dance, which can only be used when the player is about to lose all their life points, granting an extra turn. Additionally, the card restores everyone's life points to what they were before taking damage. Although at the end of the extra turn, it deals 20 damage to her, which would ultimately make Pearl lose her life. In other words, she had to win in that extra round or lose the game. Despite the risks, Pearl remains confident in her ability, and Faye also demonstrates full belief in the partner he chose. To start the turn, she activates the spell Vibrations of Life, which restores 10 life points, bringing her total to 11, while Dax was only left with 4. Then the girl casts a counterattack beam, healing 6 damage to him thanks to the Fervent Rhythm. To protect himself, Dax uses a first aid card, leaving him with only 1 life point, but Pearl casts the Grand Flame to inflict more damage. With that, Kelrich takes action and plays 2 of her cards to restore her partner's life, leaving Dax with 3 life points. However, Pearl anticipated that they would have healing cards and plays her penultimate card called Words of the Past, which doubles the damage of a phase's attack on an opponent, meaning she manages to deal double damage to Dax, totaling 7 points altogether. Dax is impressed with Pearl and acknowledges that she's not just a burden to Faye but remains calm in the situation because he still has a card that can transfer all the damage he receives to Kelrich, who still have a lot of life points. With that, Dax and his partner are left with 3 life points, while Pearl, in theory, would end her turn and receive 20 damage. Pearl becomes sad and apologizes to Faye because she tried to win without his help, but she's still very inexperienced in the games for that. Faye disagrees and says she was a great partner after all. They both won anyway. Kelrich is confused because Faye is prohibited from playing any cards and Pearl wouldn't be able to turn the game around alone. But the girl explains that finally the conditions of her last and rare card were met, allowing its use, which granted bringing a card from the depot back to her hand. So Pearl chooses the special healer card called Heartache. Dax and Kelrich are surprised because at no point did they use this special card, even though it was already in the depot. And Leshy remembers that Faye placed it in the second phase of the game as a way to switch to the healer later, which was why he asked the operator if it was possible to switch cards with his partner. Faye explains that he only used another card after placing the special one in the depot to divert his opponent's attention, and that from the beginning, the plan was to win through damage. Dax and Kelrich are annoyed to realize they were deceived, and the girl questions why he didn't choose to be a wizard since it was the ideal class for dealing damage. Faye explains that they had many healing cards in their hands and could lose if they engaged in a direct damage contest, whereas with that mental game, they had a better chance of winning. With a special card, Pearl transfers the 20 damage points she would receive to Dax, finally causing the guy to lose all his life points. And so Faye and Pearl end the game as winners. Dax admits he underestimated the girl and says he and Faye are destined to be rivals because he intends to play against both of them in many other games. Then Dax promises the audience that he will commit to surpassing himself to become even stronger, which makes the losing teams cheer much stronger than the winners. However, Faye doesn't mind because for him, all that matters is that it was a fun game. The next day, Leshy is all excited to find a rare game in the town of Malra. The vendor compliments the goddess's keen eyes but warns that the board game is legendary and too expensive for a girl like her to afford. Then Leshy reveals she has a credit card with an infinite limit, leaving the man shocked. She asks him to send the store's products to the ruined branch when Faye appears and reminds them that manager Miranda said not to overspend. Leshy responds that she remembers and will stop spending after buying everything from about 2 or 3 stores. Next, Faye observes that Pearl is also spending a lot but on food instead of games. Pearl explains that it's a reward for her excelling in the mental arena match and suggests they go to a famous takoyaki shop for her to buy more food. Suddenly, 2 girls appear asking for a photo of the former goddess and to get her autograph, which surprises the trio because in Ruin, people are afraid of Leshy for knowing her dangerous side. Shortly after, more girls appear, this time asking for Faye's autograph as they were impressed by his playing style in the mental arena match. The guy feels a bit overwhelmed with so many fans, and before he knows it, there's already a line forming to get his autograph. As Pearl was crucial to her team's victory in the mental arena match, the girl thinks she'll soon have a line of fans too, but she ends up realizing she was very wrong about that, which frustrates her. After some time, Faye and Leshy finally finish giving their autographs, and the former goddess asks for her partner's autograph to keep as her greatest treasure, just like humans usually do. The guy agrees to give Leshy an autograph, but since they didn't have any paper, he considers going to a stationery store to buy some. But the goddess stops him and suggests he autograph the back of her bow, because then she'll always have his autograph and will feel more unique. Faye feels shy but does as Leshy asked when Pearl arrives with more food and asks why the two were so close. The guy starts explaining that the goddess asked for an autograph from him, while Nell watches the 3 from afar behind a bush. Suddenly, a crowd appears and surrounds Dax. Pearl realizes it's the filming of Dax's lunch, a live broadcast where tens of thousands of fans watch him eat in real time. She mentions that there are rumors that the income from this broadcast is twice the salary of an apostle when Kelridge interrupts and says it's because Dax is extremely popular for being smart, handsome, athletic, and a first-class player who cares about his friends. The girl also thanks them for the game they had the day before, and Pearl asks if she participates in Dax's lunch. Kelridge explains that no, for her, the guy is just a business partner. However, after bidding farewell to the trio, Kelridge joins the other girls who were watching Dax eat, showing herself to be a big fan of him, which explains all the praise about him. Faye comments that everyone in town has very unique habits and asks if Nell agrees. The girl, who is hiding watching the 3, stands up surprised to have been discovered, and the group explains that they noticed her presence from the beginning. Nell then asks for permission again to help Faye and explains that having lost the gods games 3 times, she can no longer fight but can be useful as a team analyst. Faye declines the girl's request, and she asks if she can collaborate as a domestic worker, but this time Leshy declines the request. Then Nell apologizes for wasting the group's time and begins to leave. But before she goes, Faye asks if she's really satisfied with just being on the list or being a domestic worker. After all, it's clear the girl wants more than that. Nell is a bit confused, and Faye tells her he's going to meet with the Arcane Court the next day. And so at the meeting, Belegar announces that the 3 will finally have their main game, a battle of wisdom with the gods, as there are currently 3 of them. The manager also explains that to meet the 10 members recommended by headquarters, 12 apostles from the Malra branch were selected to complete the team. Then Nell, who was also at the meeting, asks why she's there. Faye said she'll be cheering for them because teammates should cheer from close by, and even though it's not what the girl wants, she must trust and do it for now. Even without fully understanding what Faye was planning, Nell promises to cheer for them with all her might. Later, the 3 pass through the portal and arrive at Elements. This time it's a desert, where they meet Dax and Kelridge, as well as a girl named Camilla and her team, who according to Dax only came to fill numbers. The guy also says that this event is Faye's moment, and even though the 2 are rivals by fate, he's looking forward to seeing him play. Faye promises to give his best as always when suddenly a pyramid appears in the middle of the desert, making everything around it tremble. Then the meat from the game appears welcoming the 15 participants and notes that this is a number of apostles well below what the god expected. Nevertheless, the meat closes the registrations and begins to explain how the game will work. Each participant receives a flower button that, when blooming, can gain 3 different colors, with a golden flower, called the sunflower, another black, the poison flower, while the others are white, the sandflowers. The goal is to offer the sunflower at the altar at the top of the pyramid, and for that reason, the game is called Sun Relay. Faye estimates it's about 2 miles to the goal, and Leshy would take less than 5 minutes to reach it if there were no obstacles along the way, which there surely will be. Meep keeps explaining the game and says that the gods' team will be responsible for stealing the flowers. At this moment, several giant feline golems emerge from under the sand, and Pearl finds them all cute, but soon becomes scared when she sees how big the cats are. The felines are the gods' main defense team, and Meep explains that they will all carry a flower, and whoever has theirs stolen will be disqualified, which applies to both players and cats. However, if the sun's flower is stolen, the entire team loses. For this reason, there are 2 ways to win. Offer the sun's flower to the altar at the top of the pyramid, or steal the opposing team's flower. Since the sunflower determines victory, those from the sand serve as camouflage, while the poison flower serves as a trap because the player who steals it will leave their entire team stunned for 5 seconds, preventing them from moving, attacking, or even defending themselves. In other words, it's interesting to let the opposing team steal the poison flower. Faye observes that if they manage to make the cats steal their poison flower, Leshy could steal as many flowers as she wanted during the 5 seconds the beasts would be stunned, but the opposite would also lead them to defeat. This leads him to conclude that the team needs to protect the sun's flower and plan a way for the cats to steal their poison flower. Then everyone checks the color of the inside of the flower they receive and finds out that Pearl got the sun's flower and Kelrich got the poison, while the others got the sandflower. Next, Beep warns that the exchange is free, and they can carefully decide which player will get which flower. Then everyone realizes that due to the distance from the pyramid and the speed the felines must have, physical ability will be important for victory. For this reason, Faye thinks about leaving the sun's flower with Lesha. However, the girl thinks that maybe it would be more interesting for her to take the poison flower because the gods' team will think she's taking the sun's flower, as it's the most obvious option. Faye agrees with the idea, but even so, they still need to decide which player gets the sun's flower. He reflects that the person who gets it will need superhuman strength and asks if any of the apostles present have such an arise. Several participants raise their hands, including Kelrich, which surprises Faye and the others. The girl explains that her arise is a physical enhancement of the superhuman type and also has self-defense, so it's not a bad idea to leave the sun's flower with her. Faye responds that he will take Kelrich's powers into consideration and asks Meep if it's possible for them to exchange flowers during the game. The creature responds yes, but if someone is left for a moment without any flower in hand, it will be considered stolen, leading the player to be disqualified. In other words, even if they throw the flowers to each other or Pearl uses her power to switch places, the participants would be disqualified due to the brief moment they were left with 0 flowers in hand. Then Faye asks if it's possible to throw the flower to someone else in a tight spot, and Meep responds yes, but it only serves to save the flower because the participant who throws it will be disqualified. This makes Faye observe that they have to strive for perfect teamwork to protect the sun's flower together, and Dax says it's up to Faye to decide who gets which flower. Camilla is shocked by this decision because the guy always wants to take on the lead role. Then Dax remembers that he lost the bet he made with Nell when he was defeated by Faye in the mental arena match, and therefore at that moment he's only interested in seeing how his rival will deal with the gods. To help Faye decide more clearly who gets what, Camilla shows the arises and the history of all the members of their team to him, who quickly analyzes everything. Then Faye asks all the apostles to hand over their flowers so he can shuffle them. Then he reflects for a moment on who should get the suns and poison flowers, and after making his decision, he distributes the flowers. Then Faye asks everyone to check the color of the flower they received without letting anyone see. Camilla asks him to at least inform who has the sun's flower, but he refuses to tell and informs that as part of his strategy, because if they know who has the flower that determines victory, they will try to protect the person without even realizing it, which will end up revealing it to the god. Dax observes that this is a good strategy, and Faye concludes that the god is used to that game, so the team has to come up with a new strategy that he has never seen before. With the strategy defined, Meep starts the game and the god Matmatiu appears at the top of the pyramid, bringing with him a strange noise that Faye wonders if it's telepathy. Pearl is curious to know if there is a predecessor to the god since he is called Matmatiu, but he denies it and explains that everything in that world is part of the game, including his own name. Then the god gets a flower, and Faye thinks there is a good chance it's the opposing team's sunflower, since it would be safer for the god himself to have it. That Matmatiu asks the humans to play with all their physical and mental strength when he sees Leshy and Faye standing still. The god is at a loss for what's happening, and the two speak at the same time that they carry the sun's flower. Meanwhile, Ouroboros gets tired of just waiting for Faye to invoke her and decides to go look for him herself. Back in the game, Balaguer and Nell watch Leshy and Faye talk about having the sunflower. She suspects that one of them might actually have the poison one, and Balaguer asks if there's a chance they're both lying. The girl ponders for a moment and acknowledges the possibility, which only heightens her curiosity to see the match through to the end. The other players are also puzzled by Faye's plan, but Dax grasps it and decides to go along, thinking that if he can't fool his friends, he won't be able to fool a god. As the game begins, the 15 apostles start running away from Mathieu, who summons his army of 1667 feline golems, considering the numerical difference fair. While they struggle to flee, Camilla observes that the situation isn't favorable for their team. Coverage decides to take the lead and proves to be much faster than the others, even without activating her Arise. However, the god's army also speeds up and starts running at 50 miles per hour, prompting Faye to realize that at this rate, they'll be caught in 30 seconds. Suddenly, Leshy asks the players in front to dodge, and Dax yells for Courage to jump back. One of the felines, a long-distance mage, creates a sandstorm in front of the group, halting their advance. At that moment, one of the cats manages to capture a player. The other tries to defend their friend but ends up caught as well. With both sandflowers stolen, the two players are disqualified. Then several felines advance towards Camilla, and she shields herself with her Arise, freezing them. More of the army appear, and Dax uses his power, dubbed Dax's Hurricane, to send some cats flying. Suddenly, Faye warns Pearl of an attack by one of the golems, which was on top of her. The girl manages to escape, but the felon's claws tear her clothes. Realizing that others were approaching, Pearl uses her Arise to teleport, but ends up on top of another cat, which captures her. However, before it could take the flower from her, Kelrich punches the golem, sending it flying. Pearl is impressed by her savior's power when they both notice several apostles being captured and disqualified from the game. Camilla becomes concerned again about the number of felines, and Faye, realizing the situation is dire, asks the former goddess to use her superhuman strength. So she punches the ground with force, causing it to split and knock down several feline golems. With the path cleared, the players start running away again, while Kelrich, after seeing Leshy's power, becomes worried about what would happen to the human world if they angered her. Shortly after, the terrain returns to normal because, as they are in elements, the desert can be regenerated at will. At that moment, the group notices an oasis ahead. Dax remembers their goal is to reach the pyramid, but observes that the oasis is a unique feature and asks for his partner's opinion. Coverage responds that normally they should ignore something like that, but Pearl needed a break to change as her clothes were torn. The girl is grateful for the consideration when she realizes the golems were close again. Faye asks if Leshy could repeat what she did earlier. The ancient goddess confirms and again hits the ground with all her strength, splitting the ground as before. However, this time the felines manage to jump high and pass the obstacle smoothly. Then one of the players launches fireballs, but the cats shield themselves with an anti-magic shield and eliminate the guy, then head towards Camilla, capturing her. Faye approaches to try to save the captain, but Camilla warns that she has a sandflower, and they shouldn't waste time trying to save her. Next, the captain uses the little time she has left to freeze the felines, giving the team the opening they need to escape. However, now only the 5 main players remain, while the opposing team still has 1237 players. As they run away, Coverage asks why Dax is holding his flower in his hand instead of hiding it in his clothes like the others did. The guy explains that if caught, there's no point in trying to hide the flower, so it's better to keep it in hand to be able to throw it to another teammate. Suddenly, a new sandstorm arises as punishment from the mage golem for them straying too far. A storm surrounds Dax, and to save him, Pearl opens a transport. Unfortunately, the guy is caught, leaving Kelrich irritated with the felines. The girl will want to pick a fight with them, and Faye tries to calm her down. But Kelrich points out that she has the sandflower and therefore can stay behind to try to hold off the golems. Then Leshy says she doesn't have the sunflower either, and for that reason will stay on the team to delay the felines while Faye and Pearl move forward. And so the group is divided in two. Outside of elements, Camilla apologizes to the manager for losing. Beledra takes the opportunity to ask her which player has the sunflower. Since none of them had that information, the girl guesses that Kelrich and Leshy have sandflowers, while Faye has the sunflower and Pearl has the poison one, as bringing both special ones close to God is the most obvious choice. Meanwhile, Dax approaches Nell. The two had bet on who would win the friendly game. If Dax was the winner, the girl would have to join his group. But if Faye won, the guy would have to do what she asked. Since Nell won the bet, she asked Dax to do everything to help Faye win that game against the god, and he says he fulfilled his part of the deal. Back in the game, Faye and Pearl finally reach the pyramid. where the guy admits to his friend that he's the one carrying the sunflower, which would grant victory when offered at the pyramid's altar. Pearl promises to support Faye as much as she can, but the god challenges them to climb to the top, where the altar is, and summons his army of felines, which appear behind the duo and capture Faye. Pearl is worried, but he reminds her that all that matters is the flower and throws it to her. With that, Matmathieu understands that it's the sunflower and sends the felines after it. So Pearl climbs the pyramid as fast as she can until she reaches where the god was, who challenges her to pass through him. The girl uses her rise, and her opponent thinks she teleported to the top of the pyramid. But shortly after, he realizes that Pearl was actually on top of him, determined to win by stealing the sunflower from the god's team, which was on his staff. With a surprise attack, she manages to grab the flower, but contrary to what she thought, it was the poison flower, which paralyzes everyone on the team for 5 seconds. Matmathieu celebrates the fact that the girl fell into the trap and shows that his true sunflower is in the oasis, completely camouflaged in the middle of the forest. The god doesn't mind revealing the location of his flower, as he was about to find out where the opponent team's flower was due to another effect of Pearl taking the poison flower. First, he checks the 2 flowers he got, Pearl's and Faye's. The first one that opens is a sandflower, and the god thinks how interesting it would be if the other one were the poison flower. But upon opening the second flower, he discovers it's another sandflower, which even surprises Pearl. Then Matmathieu uses the advantage he gained to check Leschy's and Kelrich's flowers, who were still fleeing from the cats. However, neither of them had the sunflower, which leaves the god completely confused, as there were no other players left. At this moment, Faye appears, revealing that he has the flower he's looking for. The guy explains that before being caught near the pyramid, he was with 2 flowers because one of the players was disqualified without having his flower stolen. When Dax, the player who had the sunflower, was caught by the sandstorm, he sent it to Faye through the portal. Besides, the guy moved further away from the golems than he should to deliberately activate the sandstorm as a way to hide the action of throwing the flower. After explaining everything, Faye asks the god if that wasn't an interesting game. Matmathieu agrees, but challenges the human to climb to the top without being caught by his army. However, right at that moment, he is paralyzed. Leschy, who had the poison flower, says the god erred by not stopping the felines when he realized that Pearl and Faye didn't have it, because as the cats continued chasing the girls, she was captured, activating the trap at the most opportune moment for the team. Matmathieu remains confident since the flower's effect only lasts 5 seconds. However, the god didn't count on Kelrich's superhuman powers, who uses his strength to throw Faye to the top, where he leaves the sunflower on the altar, thus achieving another victory thanks to the teamwork of the team. With that, the god admits defeat and leaves the sunflower with Faye as a prize. After leaving Elements, Faye goes to Nell and tells her that she knew she made Dax give his best so that he could win. The guy thanks her for that, and the girl says she just wanted him to win. Faye asks if she doesn't want anything else, and Nell admits she wanted to play on his team as an apostle, although it's not possible since she lost 3 games and was forced to retire. Faye says there's a way for Nell to continue playing despite the number of defeats she has. Balaguer agrees but warns that it's very risky and that in 20 years, no one has ever tried to do it. Faye says he's aware of the difficulty and asks Nell for her score, who explains she has 3 victories and 3 defeats. Then he asks Balaguer to contact Miranda to arrange a way for the girl to play with the Apostadora. In the meeting with the manager, she confirms that there's a goddess named Apostadora, who unlike the other gods doesn't increase the number of victories but reduces the number of defeats. However, Miranda warns that to play with her, she needs a specific portal that they don't have in the Malware branch. So Faye reminds the manager that there's one of those portals in ruin. She unintentionally admits that there is indeed a portal covered in dust for about 40 years and asks what he's going to do. Then Faye explains that he will give up one of his victories so that Nell can challenge the Apostadora to remove one of her defeats. Both Nell and Miranda don't like the idea of him spending one of his victories since Faye is the only one who has won 6 times, being the closest humanity has come to zeroing out the gods' games. So Pearl offers one of her victories since they don't carry as much weight as Faye's and would help Nell in the same way. After all, the girl deserves to play again. However, Faye insists that Nell use one of his victories, and Leschy tells Miranda that as an ex-goddess, she knows that the gods don't mind if an apostle wants to play again because they smile upon those who achieve their own miracle, something Nell proved to do and therefore is someone who deserves that chance. This convinces Miranda to accept that idea, and Nell thanks the group for everything. Faye warns that they can only help, but it's up to her to achieve the miracle she needs. However, unlike the manager, he makes it clear that he doesn't mind losing some victories so that she can succeed. Even so, Nell agrees to only borrow 1 victory from Faye to play against the Apostador. 96 hours later, already in the game, the girl begins to despair, and her opponent, who looks like her, calls her weak. A few days ago, before the match began, Faye devised a plan to face the better, and the next morning the group set off for the ruined branch. Along the way, Nell was so preoccupied with the game that she took a while to hear Pearl calling her. She apologized for being distracted, and Faye explained that he too was thoughtful about the match because the better is different from the other gods. Her challenge is an individual battle between the human and her, besides the fact that losing means taking a defeat instead of giving a victory like in other games. To secure this opportunity for Nell, Faye will use one of his victories as a chip, which leaves the girl very worried because if she doesn't win, she'll harm the guy. However, despite the risk, Faye shows no concern, which makes Pearl and Nell wonder since the average win rate in the gods' games is 11%, 10 times heavier than a defeat. Furthermore, Faye has already won 6 times, being very close to achieving his dream of clearing the games with 10 victories. Even so, Faye says that Nell doesn't have to worry about anything because he has an idea. Pearl is happy and deduces that the guy has a secret plan to win or has figured out which games the better could choose. However, Faye says it's neither of those options, but he can't explain his idea yet because he's not sure if it will work since it's the first time he's competing with a goddess. Next, Faye asks Lesha if she minds if Nell doesn't win and he loses one of his victories. The former goddess says she doesn't mind because the girl will succeed, and if he has an idea to help her, he should try. Nell thanks her and says she'll do her best. Leshy then says it's impossible to lose after so much time invested in expectations. After all, they even canceled the game's championship to give her this chance. Suddenly, Nell faints from the pressure she felt from the former goddess's words, who didn't even realize she was pressuring the girl. Arriving at the ruined branch, the group meets the manager Miranda, who greets them congratulating Pearl on her great work in the last games. Then Nell hands over some cookies she brought from Malra as a gift to Miranda as an apology for bothering her. The manager thanks her and says she should do her best and return to the games. Then Miranda asks when Nell wants to challenge the better, and the girl replies as soon as possible. At night, in the female dormitory, the team's girls gather in Pearl's room. While she and Nell enjoy a drink together, Leshy enjoys the comfort of her friend's bed, explaining that she saved her salary to get it. Shortly afterward, the former goddess falls asleep and Nell thanks Pearl for being so well received in their branch. Then Pearl comments that Faye and Leshy are her goals because both are admired by ordinary people like her, and for that reason it's good to have someone like Nell around so that they can strive together. Nell is so moved by Pearl's words that she drops her drink to hug the girl. She also comments that the two need to grow so they can help Faye and Lesha. Pearl agrees but says that before that, they both need a bath since they had gotten dirty from the drink Nell spilled. Leshy, who until then was sleeping, wakes up quickly upon hearing the word bath, and Pearl asks if she wants to join them. The former goddess declines the invitation, saying she remembered something she had to do and leaves the room, which makes Pearl wonder because she always remembers an appointment when the subject of a bath comes up. Then Nell enjoys the comfort of Pearl's bathtub when her friend shows up to join her. The girl is immediately startled by Pearl's curves and begins to feel envious, realizing that's why Leshy always flees whenever she mentions a bath. To boost her friend's self-esteem, Pearl compliments Nell's thighs, which ends up working. On game day, the team prepares to meet the goddess. Faye is surprised that there are no cameras to film the match like in the other gods' games, and Miranda explains that divine lenses don't work with the better, demonstrating that she is a goddess who enjoys individual disputes and does not allow external influences. Nell promises she'll win no matter what, and the group passes through the portal, which takes them to a small, rusty casino room very different from what they're used to seeing in Elements. The girl looks for the better while asking why she chose such a small place to play. A voice replies that it's a place where the heart is reflected, meaning Nell's heart created that small room. Then the better appears, possessing the same appearance as the player, and explains that that room is the materialization of her insecurity, which has a strong light because that's how she envisions the future. The better is pleased with the quality of the table and comments that Nell seems to have the determination to play with her, which makes her happy since it's been a long time since the goddess was challenged by humans. Then the better introduces herself as Grimoire, the polymorphic goddess. She explains that she's called by many names like Shapeshifter, Mimic, Doppelganger, and several other 200 names that humans have given her in the past, with the better being one of them. Faye asks if the goddess prefers to be called Grimoire, but she shows indifference to it. So the guy gets straight to the point and confirms the fact that Nell will have a defeat nullified if she wins in an individual match. The better confirms and explains that he can bet as many victories as he wishes. Without hesitation, Faye bets 3 of his 6 victories, which makes Nell and Pearl protest immediately. The guy explains that he has already made his decision because that way, if Nell wins, she goes from 3 to 0 defeats. Pearl confirms but makes sure to remind him that if she loses, he will have 3 fewer victories. Faye keeps on not giving it the proper importance, which prompts the girl to seek Leshy's help. However, the ancient goddess, much like Faye, doesn't seem to care one bit about the risks. And so the gambler accepts the challenge, wondering if there ever was a human who bet so much with her. Meanwhile, Nell, who was already nervous and feeling pressured, feels even worse knowing that if she doesn't win, she'll have made Faye lose half of her winnings. Then the goddess reveals that the game will be poker, because Nell is more accustomed to human games and also because she's in a good mood due to the lack of visitors lately. After that, the challenge begins and the gambler prohibits any kind of talking or cheering from the team. So the three of them silently and attentively watch the game as Nell deals the cards and says she can't lose because she doesn't want to let Faye down. Next, the goddess uses her powers to make the cards float, so that neither of them has to bother holding the deck. Nell examines her cards and notices she has a pair of fives, which means if she gets one more, she'll have a three of a kind. Then the girl decides to exchange three of the cards, keeping only the pair in her hands, and the goddess makes the same decision, making Faye realize that her opponent must also have a pair. Leshy also observes that Nell has a weak pair, making it unlikely that the goddess has a lower pair. After that, the gambler lets Nell choose first how many chips to bet, and the girl chooses to spend 2 chips. Then Grimoire bets all her chips, showing that she didn't earn her nickname of Gambler for nothing. This action makes Nell feel quite confident because the goddess has shown she's very confident with the hand she has. The girl realizes she only had 2 choices, either bet everything 2, ending the game with just 1 round, or give up, which would make her lose the chips she bet but leave 3 to continue the game. Nell carefully evaluates the situation, wondering if the gambler was just bluffing or actually has a good hand. The girl then remembers the consequences of losing and decides to give up the bet, forfeiting her chips. Then they reveal the cards they had, and Pearl is relieved to see that Nell made the right decision because if she had continued with the bet, she would have lost the game. In the second round, Nell receives another 5 cards, getting an even worse hand than before. For this reason, she decides to exchange 4 cards from her hand, keeping only the ace as it's the best in the game. Meanwhile, the goddess chooses to exchange only 1 card, making the girl quite nervous, because this decision shows that her opponent probably already has 4 combinations. Nell becomes anxious and considers trying to bluff to make the gambler give up, but she realizes that if the gambler has a 3 of a kind, her plan wouldn't work. So the girl decides to bet 2 chips to show confidence. But even before finishing her sentence, the goddess raises the bet, forcing Nell to bet all her chips to continue. The girl is afraid of losing and ends up giving up just like she did in the first round. The goddess regrets the decision and reveals that she actually had nothing in her hands, which means Nell would have won if she had continued with the bet. The player is confused because the goddess had exchanged only 1 card previously, even though she didn't have a good hand. Her opponent explains that the cards don't matter because she realized that if she bluffed, Nell would give up because she doesn't want to win. The girl starts to disagree, and the goddess explains that before the game started, she said she couldn't lose instead of saying she would win, showing a fear of losing greater than the risks necessary to win. And so the two of them go to the third and final round, where Nell bets her only chip and hopes to get good hand. Unfortunately, she doesn't receive anything valuable, but she realizes she still has some chance if she gets a 3 or 8. So Nell chooses to exchange only 1 card, and the goddess notices her intention but explains that combinations like that are strong exactly because they're not easy to get. However, the girl continues to hope to get one of the 2 cards needed for victory, as that was her only chance to win. The gambler observes her attitude and recalls that the gods smile upon those who perform their own miracles, not on players who are cornered and rely on a miracle like her at that moment. Nell ignores the goddess's words, but she ends up drawing an ace from the deck. Then her opponent shows that she has a 3 of a kind, confirming the girl's defeat. The gambler says that instead of trying to avoid losing, Nell should have chosen a strategy for victory, as she missed the chance to bluff in the previous round and win. The girl is so upset about losing that she ends up falling to the ground while the goddess calls her weak. With the defeat, the gambler takes the 3 winnings that Faye bet on her friend, while Nell would remain with her 3 defeats. Then the goddess says goodbye to the group and starts to leave, but Faye says it's not over yet and reminds Nell to go easy before the game. Then the guy challenges the goddess to an individual game against him because he was sure she would like to keep playing. For this, without hesitation, Faye bets her remaining 3 winnings and says that if she wins, Nell will have no losses. The gambler accepts the challenge and destroys the place to create another environment, according to the current player, choosing a god's casino called 3 Cheats. The goddess explains once again that the place changes and molds itself according to the heart of the human who challenges it, and emphasizes the fact that she always analyzes their bodies, spirits, and even powers they possess. However, the gambler, for some reason, couldn't reflect Faye's appearance, so she chose the appearance of a human she had recently seen. She also explains that the game she's going to challenge Faye with is called 3 Cheats, involving 3 games, heads or tails, poker, and babanuki, in which she will use only one cheat to win, and the guy's objective is to discover which cheat she used. Then the gambler says she'll tell Faye's group the cheat she's going to use so that the two only proceed with the game if the girls accept the method. Leshy agrees to hear what the goddess has to say and bursts into laughter as soon as she hears the cheat she intends to use. All three agree that Faye is capable of unraveling the method the gambler chose, and the guy also accepts the challenge. To start, the two begin with the heads or tails game. The goddess lets Faye choose the coin and asks if she can also play. However, the gambler explains that to be fair, she'll leave that job of being a dealer to his colleagues, starting with Nell. The girl accepts the task and decides to use her foot to flip the coin because she always uses her legs because of the arise she possesses. Nell also explains that when she kicks the coin up, Faye should make her choice, and then, to be even fairer, she'll kick the coin again. And so Nell flips the coin up, and Faye reflects that at that moment, there isn't much the goddess can cheat, but it certainly involves a way to make him choose the wrong side of the coin he chooses. So Faye chooses heads, and Nell kicks the coin up again, but it falls to the ground with the tails facing up. He notes that there was no strange movement coming from the goddess, giving the false sense of defeat due to the 50% chance of this happening. Although he knows there was a cheat since his goal is to exactly discover her method. Then the two move on to the poker game, and as Faye shows signs of impatience because the manager Miranda is waiting for them, the goddess decides not to use the chips and make a single dispute. Leshy chooses to be the dealer this time to deal the cards. She checks if the deck is correct and without any marks, while Faye reflects that if she had cheated with the coin during heads or tails, there should be something suspicious about the cards, since the gambler said she would use the same cheat in the 3 games. But since Leshy finds nothing suspicious, the guy considers the probability of the goddess using any divine power to be low. Then the cards are dealt, and Faye notices that he got a good hand and just needed to swap a single card to win with a full house. So the guy asks who will make the exchange first, and since the gambler replies that it doesn't matter, he asks to start and swaps his 5 cards because although he had a good hand, he had to ensure that his opponent wasn't expecting to get the next cards from the deck. Then Leshy deals the cards, and Faye again gets a good hand, but still the goddess wins as expected. Faye tries to think of any cheat she could have used in that game that could also have served in heads or tails, but he can't think of anything that fits both games. And so they go for the final game, Babanuki, another card game. This time, Pearl shuffles the cards and checks if there are any signs of cheating on the cards. After doing so, the girl deals 27 cards to Faye and 26 to the goddess, which makes the guy wonder why he got one more. As he got more cards to make it fairer, the gambler lets Faye play the first round, besides calling Pearl, who was already leaving the 2, to stand behind her as a way to make her cheat harder. Pearl checks the opponent's hand and tells Faye that there's no sign of a mark on any of the cards. Then the goddess picks the Joker card from the guy's hand, which surprises him because he thought she would avoid doing that. The two continue playing, and in the end, Faye realizes he's in the lead because if he picks any card from his opponent's hand, other than the Joker, victory will be his. However, when the guy chooses which card he wants to pick, he ends up picking exactly the Joker. Faye doesn't understand how the goddess did that because without the ability to predict, there would be no way for the goddess to have placed the card in the exact location to be chosen. But with this cheat, it wouldn't allow victory in the heads or tails game. Having finished the 3 games, the gambler asks Faye what cheat she used to win them all. The guy thinks for a moment, reviewing everything that happened up to that moment because since his opponent is a goddess, she can literally do anything, although he knows his partners would never accept that challenge if the cheat was something a human couldn't unravel. Faye spends a long time thinking and then asks the goddess to play Babanuki against him once again. The gambler sees that request as an attempt by Faye to gain more time because he hasn't found an answer yet, but he assures that by the end of that game, he will uncover the cheat she is using to win. The goddess accepts, and just like last time, Faye starts the game because he started with 1 more card. The two play the game until almost the end, and the goddess says that the game will end like last time because Faye will pick the Joker again. The guy disagrees and says that her absolute victory is gone. Then Faye manages to pick the necessary card to win, avoiding the Joker, which leaves the goddess completely confused because her cheat was still ongoing, and it was supposed to be impossible for him to escape defeat. With the end of the game, Faye reveals that the gambler's cheat was to have outside help because the girls were manipulating the situation for her to win in all the games. Leshy, as always, is having fun with the game and asks how his friend managed to figure it out. Faye explains that she was sure the goddess's method involved forcing him to pick the Joker card. However, she couldn't influence his hand, which led him to wonder why Pearl, who was in charge of the deck, had handed him an extra card, even though it put him at a disadvantage. The guy recounts that this made him start to suspect his partners, and from there he noticed that Pearl was always behind his opponent and could use her arise to exchange any card he chose for the Joker, ensuring the goddess's victory. Upon concluding this, Faye realizes that the other games were also manipulated by her friends, with each one going exactly into the game they needed to cheat. He also explains that it wasn't difficult to reach this conclusion since the goddess herself warned that she always analyzes everything about humans, including their powers, which meant she knew the arises of the entire group. Nell laments having helped the better admit that she used her power to manipulate the coin tosses in heads or tails, just as Leshy admits to manipulating the card distribution so that the victory was guaranteed for the opponent. Then the goddess asks how Faye managed to win the last game. After all, cheating would make him lose every time. She questions if Pearl didn't refrain from exchanging the cards on purpose, but before the girl answers, Faye explains that his friend didn't cheat because she couldn't, since she can't use her power unless she touched the object 3 minutes before, and he waited that time to make the move deliberately, knowing this information. The better observes that Faye deceived her by saying he wanted one more game just to observe when in fact he wanted to test his theory. However, she thinks it was just a matter of luck that he didn't pick the Joker, but Faye explains that he knew the position of the cards because the goddess didn't shuffle them as she should have because she was fully trusting in cheating. With no other choice, the better acknowledges Faye's victory and removes the 3 losses from Nell as promised. Then the goddess asks why Faye said earlier that no matter what happened, they would win anyway. So the guy shows that after Nell lost and his wins dropped to 3, the whole group ended up with the same number of wins, which he deliberately adjusted so that they win together as a team. The goddess understands and asks the group to come back to her more often. Then the 4 return to the real world happy that Nell is back in the games of the gods. But before they go out to celebrate, they decide to report the girl's return to Miranda. Upon arriving in the manager's office, the group finds her in a meeting on an urgent matter. More than 200 apostles were forced to enter a game of a large labyrinth, and 57 hours had passed since then, and none of them had returned. Miranda explains to the 4 that an emergency rescue group has been set up for this case, and from the Ruin branch, Faye's team was chosen. Pearl asks if they can return to the real world if they fail to win, and the manager explains that unlike other games, it is only possible to return upon achieving victory, and that's exactly why repeating the game as many times as they want is allowed. Miranda also explains that there are 2 ways to rescue the people, either by clearing the game or finding the labyrinth's salvation item. Faye notices that the mandatory call that happened to everyone is very different from what usually happens, and Leshy agrees because she doesn't remember seeing a game where apostles from everywhere joined together in that way. So Faye reflects that he has to figure out the god's intention behind the labyrinth because otherwise he will be able to make games of this kind again. But anyway, Miranda says that the group's objective is to find the salvation item and help the players who are stuck in the labyrinth. The manager also apologizes for asking this right after they won against the better, but Faye says it's okay, and that he will play as always. And so the 4 pass through the portal, which sends them to the labyrinth game's difficulty selection. One option is super easy, and the other is difficult, where the player will have to lose their life. Nell and Pearl immediately show interest in the safer option, but unlike them, Faye and Leshy choose the more difficult option without hesitation, because there is a possibility of returning to the real world only when winning in hard mode. After selecting the difficulty, the number 0 appears on the head of each of the 4 and disappears quickly. The group doesn't understand what that meant when they are transported to the labyrinth in a very open and calm field. Initially, Pearl remains focused not to lower her guard and fall into traps, but changes her posture as soon as she sees several apple trees. Faye agrees to take a break since they were still at the beginning of the labyrinth, and it would be a good idea to have a strategy meeting. Then Pearl, who was very hungry, gets excited about the perfect appearance of the apples and rushes to approach one without the slightest care. Immediately, the fruit flies in the girl's face, making the 4 return to the beginning of the game, leading Faye to realize that that labyrinth will be troublesome. Meanwhile, the better gets bored again in her world and wonders how many decades she will have to wait for another human to appear when suddenly she receives a visit from the goddess Ouroboros, who asks where Faye is. Hey folks, if you're digging this anime and want to see more, drop a like down below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Every subscription counts and helps us grow our community. Catch you in the next one.